Yeah. Everyone go sit by birds. These other ones off there. This last week was a lot of fun. I got to with me and Bo with these wisecracky type comments, just like, "Oh, I get to go and drink coffee with Dad," and so it was good. But what we did in the morning is we just went through the process of how I start writing a sermon, and so we started this process with Bo, and Bo and I dug into the passage together, and I was pleasantly not just surprised but blessed by the comments and the observations that Bo had, and so much of the sermon this morning was crafted together, and that was a lot of fun for me. Not just fun, but sort of eye-opening to see what he grasped that I maybe didn't get, just from the eyes that I have and from the perspective that I approached the passage with. There was things certainly I would have missed, and questions that he had that I maybe had just sort of breezed over. So I was really thankful for this this past week. Why don't we bow in the word of prayer? We're going to be in John 9 just for a little bit today. Father, thank you for your word. I'm asking for your blessing on our time together. We're digging into what I would almost presume to be the heart of John. And Father, would you just show us really, really clearly, I guess, areas where we are blind and areas that you would have us see and find light and the light of life at this time. So we're asking, God, that you would just open our eyes. This is not something that we can do on our own. It's not something that I can do personally, even preaching and preparing a sermon. We recognize that there is a divine thing that needs to happen by your Spirit to open blind eyes and hard hearts. And in the same way, I pray that you would help us to grasp how great these truths are and how great it is that when we have been set free. So I thank you for this morning. We ask now a blessing on it in Jesus' name. Amen. So John 9. John 9, we started last time talking about suffering, and that's not primarily the whole focus of John 9. However, we need to recognize that the mess that Jesus came into, and so as I was pondering it this week, I was struck by the fact of how central the themes and what's being discussed here in John 9, and what John is presenting. So both John 9 and John 10, we see him. In John 9, we have this man born blind from birth. And we recognize that all of us from birth have sin in us. There's no exceptions to the rule. You weren't good from birth and somehow became corrupted. All of us were born into sin. And so all of us are depraved by nature. All of us are enemies of God, it says. And so in the same way that there was physical blindness, there's also spiritual blindness and separation from God. And so we require that God would see us and then step into that. And that's what we see in the first part of John chapter 9, the first 5 verses that John makes it very clear that Jesus saw the blind man by the road. The disciples ignored him, everybody else, but Jesus sees and goes to it. And this is true in the grand gospel sense that light has come into the world. Remember John 1:14, and we have seen its glory. The glory is the one and only Son. And so there is this interplay throughout the book of John of light and darkness, seeing and not seeing. And when light comes in, the darkness has not overcome it. However, men hate the light because their deeds are evil. And so this whole light and darkness thing, and then we have blind and seeing, it's hard to pass up this observation that in our depravity from our very birth, Jesus steps into the problem that we have, and he brings the solution. And that's what we're going to look at today, is this beginning part of our solution. But we're going to see throughout the book of, the chapter John 9, what we're going to see is actually 5 conversations that lay out many people's interaction, that reveal their blindness. I'll explain that in a second. Each of these 5 conversations can show us the blindness that we have and the separation, the difference of a person who has had their eyes opened and a person who is still spiritually blind. And so in the midst of that, what we're going to see is this man born blind begin to have his faith just growing, and we're seeing it become more and more. So his physical sight is just a picture of what's going on in his heart spiritually as well. He's becoming aware and alert and alive to seeing the depth of depravity on one side, and then to seeing the greatness of who Jesus is on the other. So his eyes aren't just open to be able to see the world, his eyes are actually open spiritually as well. Now this is important because what happens in John 10? What happens in John 10? You're allowed to flip, open book exam. What happens in John 10? They tried to stone him, but what's the main message? There's another one of those I am statements. Okay, good, keep going. I'm the good shepherd. And the good shepherd goes and he seeks out his sheep. Remember that? Just like he did with the blind man. I don't think there's a mistake in what John does in putting John 9 and John 10 together. And so he's revealing this fact that there's a divine thing that has to happen in the hearts of man, that we would actually, be able to be brought into that sheep pen. Now, you're going to see everybody else, even his parents, disown this blind man in a sense. And all the religious leaders, all the society, he's kicked out of the synagogue, all the things that are going to happen in these 5 conversations, further and further and further, this man is separated from what he used to know. And then what we see in John chapter 10 is John just says, but those things don't matter. Those things don't matter. Because the good shepherd came and he finds that lost sheep. And so that sheep that is all alone is brought into the sheepfold in the safety of being with the good shepherd. So this is going to be part 1. We're going to just look at 3 of the conversations today, and then next Sunday we're going to look at the last 2. And we're going to look at the result of what is happening. So Bo rightfully pointed out that Jesus is a bit of a poop disturber, right? He likes to say things that are controversial, to stir up the Pharisees, to cause division, and that's not abnormal. So as you're in John 9 there, let me take you to Luke chapter 12. In Luke chapter 12, verse 49 and 50, it says this, I came to cast fire, this is Jesus talking, I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled, meaning that I'm going to stir things up. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against their mother, against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, that's going to happen naturally, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. So within the same house, then we shouldn't be surprised when it happens outside. The words of Jesus are going to divide. Now that is true elsewhere. Matthew picks that up, and the other Gospels, Jesus talks about that. I did not come to bring peace, but bring a sword, and to bring division. Now why would Jesus do that? It wasn't because he just liked to stir things up. So this conversation with Bo was really eye-opening to me. Why would Jesus stir up this controversy? And that's exactly what he does as we go back to John 9. So it gives us a hint. By the details that are given, we need to pause and look at the details. So let's start reading in verse 1, and then we'll look at the miracle itself. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And so these disciples, they ask, what is the cause? What caused this person's blindness? It has to be because of somebody's sin. But Jesus' answer he doesn't answer the cause, he answers the purpose. What's the purpose of this blindness? That's the real question that we need to answer. So not just the past, but what's the purpose in the future? So Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. So the works of God might be displayed. So there's something important happening. Number 1, Jesus makes clear that what is going to happen is the work of God, okay? And then he's going to do something. And so we must work the works of him who sent me, meaning that there is God in heaven and he sent me, Jesus, to do this work. Of him who sent me, well, it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. And again, we have a play on light and dark, day and night, day being the present life, night being death, after death. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with his saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud, and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. And there you have the miracle. So it's important to look when things are weird, dig into it a little bit. They're weird on purpose, and so this miracle is a bizarre one. Why spit? It's just gross. Spit makes mud. The word there for mud is dough. And this is, I'm going to say, there could be a couple reasons why Jesus does it this way. Some commentators presume that the mud has to do with Jesus being a creator. And so Genesis 2 verse 7, it says that the Lord God formed man from the dirt. In the same way here, he's bringing life through the dirt again to the man. Maybe true. I think the word here that's specifically used, though, is the whole concept of spitting, making mud is making dough. It's the same word that's used for if you're to make a loaf of bread. And so it's maybe to liken back to when he's doing this. And you're going to see in one of the conversations that they get upset, not just because of the healing, but when the healing took place. And when was that? Does anyone know? Take a guess. Why would they be mad? It was done on Saturday, the Sabbath. And so this was one of the 39 rules for Jewish people of things that they could not do on the Sabbath. That crossed the line for work. You could not knead bread or make bricks, put mud together with straw and different things to make a brick. You weren't allowed to do that. So same thing, dough or to make mud, same word that's used. And I would say that's actually right. So he does something intentionally, according to the Pharisees who made up these rules. It was not a biblical rule. It was just an extra rule to try to protect them from going too far and breaking the Sabbath rules. But Jesus says it's more important to heal this person and to break the Pharisees' rules than it is, than to just let them go on. But he stirs up the Pharisees on purpose. And we need to answer the question, why would Jesus stir up the Pharisees on purpose? Why would he just bring this division? Why separate one from another, the blind man from everybody else? Puts the person that is healed, pits them against everybody else. I'm going to say it's actually for the blind man's, it's for the purpose of the blind man. Not just that, but for us. That we get to see in stark contrast, and as this blind man, or this man born blind, now seeing, now he gets to see the depth of depravity of the religious leaders, of his neighbors, of his parents, where he came from, spiritually dead. Now he's going to see in great contrast, by causing division, he's saying, I'm going to separate you. And in separating, he's actually showing us, by his grace, what we've been saved from, but he's also causing us to realize maybe that we need to distance ourselves even more. So he shows us the foolishness of the arguments that are on the other side that maybe this man once had as well, or had the potential to have, but had Jesus not stepped in and saved him. The same thing might be true of you. And so as we look at these conversations, I think it's important that we wrestle with this idea that, man, you have been given this gift, and you hopefully have been able to see the goodness of Jesus and to see him for who he really is. We're going to see in the latter verses that the end result of all of these conversations was that this man bowed down and worshiped Jesus. So his faith grew, and he responded rightly, whereas all the other people around showed their, in a sense, their foolishness, but showed how much they despised Jesus. Even though people talked about God, they were religious people, they were upright people within the community, they were trusted among all the other people, they were family members who claimed to love God, and yet their actions revealed a disingenuine faith. So by causing division, by making distinctions, by making harsh things and stirring this up, what this division does is puts the sheep and the goats in stark contrast to one another. Does that make sense? So let's look at some of these conversations. So you saw Jesus says, we must be about the Father's work. God's going to do something. He said that in the first few verses. Then it says, I must be about the Father's work while it's day. And then he bends down and he does something. So he's actually, in a sense, saying that I am God. God is doing this work. Now, the pool might be interesting as well, because John makes that little editorial note. Sent him to go and wash. Was there actually a promise of healing there? Go wash in the pool and you'll be healed? Does it say that? No, there's not. He made mud, wiped it in his eyes, and says, go wash in the pool, but he doesn't say, and then this will happen. But it does happen. But he makes really clear, John makes really clear, the pool that he was supposed to go to means sent. Now that very likely just means that this pool was not spring-fed in that place. So it came from, it was sourced somewhere else, and then it found its being there. That's the same as Jesus, right? Jesus came forth from the Father. He was sent by the Father. And so was this miracle. This miracle was given by Jesus as he was sent. So that's maybe a lot of speculation and a lot of other work that we don't need to dwell on. But let's look at the first conversation, verse 8. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, now this is the first indication that he was a beggar, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? And some said, it is he. And others said, no, but he is like him. He kept on saying, I am the man. And so they said to him, then how are your eyes open? And he answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and I washed and I received my sight. And they said to him, well, where is he? And he said, I don't know. So you're going to see a couple things happen. You're going to see something happen in the man born blind, and you're going to see the confusion of the crowds, okay? So we have, first of all, the neighbors, the people that knew him, people that saw him growing up, and saw his life begin to change. Yes, physically, but also spiritually. And so physically his life was changed. All of a sudden he's seeing, and the response of these people are like, okay, that can't be him. There's no way it can be him. And he says, yeah, no, it's me. You can trust me. And then they ask, well, who did it? And what's his response? It is Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. What do they say? It's just a guy. I don't know who it is. That's all I know, is that it's a man named Jesus. And so his testimony starts very, very basic, right? It says this man, Jesus, maybe you've heard of him. I don't know. I've heard his name before maybe. But he just says, all I know was a guy. He talked to me. He came and he met with me. And there's something beautiful in the incarnation to this person. The fact that God would step into flesh. And that's the first thing that this man recognizes. That this is the man, Jesus. And this is what he told me to do. And he goes through the process and he bears testimony to it. And they said, well, where is he? And this guy said, I don't know. I didn't follow him. Probably should have. And so this ends that first conversation. Now we'll come back to it in a little bit. But let's look at the next one. And so they brought to the Pharisees this same man who had formerly been blind. So now he's getting dragged from place to place. So first of all, people just came and asked him questions. Secondly, they say, okay, we need to make sense of this. So let's take him to the religious leaders that we know and try to make sense of this. So he's dragged to the Pharisees. And now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus had made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud, dough, on my eyes, and I washed and I see. So the offense there comes through his testimony, okay? So he put mud in my eyes and I saw. And some of the Pharisees says, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. So he does not keep the Sabbath in the way that they thought he should keep the Sabbath. So they had, like I said, these 39 rules that some were like you can walk 1,627 steps, but not 1,628. You cross these lines, and they had all these different rules to try to make it so that they hadn't crossed. Now, all those rules weren't all bad. They were there to try to preserve and to make people walk on the right side of the line. But Jesus gets to the heart of the issue here in saying the Sabbath is about rest. Now, what is greater than rest for this man's soul and a restoration of his whole life? So some of the Pharisees were saying, well, he can't be from God. So the first controversy is this. He can't be from God because he doesn't keep our rules. He doesn't have the form of godliness that we have. And so there's a spiritual arrogance in the Pharisees here, and they stand up and they show that spiritual arrogance. But the division starts to show up. But others said, well, how can a man who is a sinner do such things? How is it possible if he breaks the Sabbath actually do them? And so their questions are actually valid here. And they argue back and forth, and there was a division among them. And so some actually want to believe in Jesus, but are having a hard time reconciling it because of their past and previous religious practices, the things that they have done to try to show a form of godliness. What happens when that is confronted? Now, maybe in your salvation, you come from a background that had a form of godliness where the rules that were followed by your family or by your faith in the past were harsh, and that you had to do this and dress this way and show up at this time and do these things and celebrate these things. And if you did not, then you probably aren't saved. But Jesus is saying the only way to be saved, of course, like you said, is the only way is through Jesus. It's not through all those other religious practices. So Jesus puts himself in the middle, and that is what causes the division. Who Jesus is and what he did is actually causing the division. So how Jesus performs the miracle, yeah, but how he also offers us salvation. It's not through the observing of rules and ritual and previous religion, forms of godliness, and so on. So, verse 17. And so they said again to the blind man, what did you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? And he said, what? He is a prophet. So we go from, I don't know, it was the man Jesus. Okay, now what did you say? Who did you say he was again? He doesn't go, he's the man Jesus. Actually, then this guy, through the division that's going on and the discussion that's there, he realizes, okay, maybe there's something more to this guy. He's acting an awful lot like one of the Old Testament prophets. He's acting a lot like that, where he's calling to account the religious practices of the people of the day. And so maybe he's a prophet. And so for this man born blind, his faith in Jesus is starting to grow. Yes, he is a prophet. There's something divine about him. A prophet was someone divinely sent with a message. Okay, so God sent and give a message for the people. Okay, he's not just a man, Jesus. He's also a prophet. Verse 18, the third conversation. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight. And they asked them, is this your son, who you saw was born blind? How then does he now see? And so they want to go to the third source, or third party, the source here. And his parents answered, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but how he now sees, we have no idea. Nor do we know who opened his eyes. So not only do they not know how the miracle happened, but also the who. And so their response is important. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself. And then we have John puts in brackets something here. Now what does John point out? Why did they answer the way that they did? They were fear of who? The Pharisees. They were scared. And so they said, okay, let him answer, because if we say that this is Jesus and it's going to pit us against all of these other religious leaders, then that's our community. So let's look at that just a little bit. And so his parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Now, this is way different than our culture today. If you get kicked out of this church, you can go down the road to another church. That's just the way it would happen. In the culture of this day, to be kicked out of the synagogue meant that you were disowned from your whole community. Your family would disown you, your community, your neighbors would have nothing to do with you. You would have a hard time buying and selling in the marketplace. Everyone would treat you like a Gentile. And they didn't associate with Gentile. You would never get invited out for another family meal. All these different things. And so for this family, I don't want us to be too harsh on the family, but the family, his own family, reveals something that may happen in your own family as well. You may be on the outs with your own family because of your faith. You may get left out of certain celebrations. You might get not asked to be a part of different things. It might just be awkward every time you show up. Your difference in your faith is going to be something that is striking to your parents, and that is because of the fear of what that does to the whole community, to their whole way of life that they grew up knowing. Now, this was also true of Nicodemus in John 3, correct? When Nicodemus came to Jesus when? At night, in privacy. He didn't want anyone to know he was coming there. But I think there's good news on the horizon here, because Nicodemus, at the very end of the book of John, we see him come with 75 pounds of spices and come to anoint Jesus' body after his death. So I think the faith might be growing in his parents, but just understand the cost that was being absorbed by these parents. And so their response spoke to how much this blind man is likely giving up. If he's going to claim Jesus, he's actually out. He's out of his community. And so the more division, the more separation, the more distinction that Jesus makes by causing this division, it's actually by his grace that he does this, so that this man can see and begin to treasure Christ above everything else. There's another great psalm, Psalm 63, that talks about that. For your love is better than life, the psalmist says. And that's what he wants to bring this man to realize. So that John 10, in God's grace, that Jesus comes back and finds this sheep that's all alone. Rejected by his community, rejected by his family, rejected by the religion that he grew up in, rejected by his neighbors, rejected by all these other people, standing alone for his faith. He knew that he had Christ. Great George Beverly Shea song, I'd rather have Jesus than anything. Right? You've heard that one? And it's exactly what's happening here. Therefore, his parents said, he's of age, ask him. Meaning that this guy is responsible for himself. Is anyone struck by the fact that this man has been begging for this long, and yet he has parents that are there? So why was the man not living with his parents? Maybe his parents didn't know what to do. They couldn't provide themselves either. And so this miracle also would have struck a chord with the parents in a unique way. We're going to leave the conversations at this, but we're starting to see the division. My encouragement would be that you read the rest of the conversations. The last two are striking, but the result of them is even more striking. That this man, the further and further he gets from what he left, and the more and more his eyes are open to the greatness of who Jesus is and what has been done for him, not just physically but spiritually, it brings him to a place of worship. And that's the place that I think it's important for all of us to go to as well. Father God, we thank you that you are in the process of opening many people's eyes. Maybe it's our own eyes to seeing the depth of hatred, the vitriol in our society towards you. We're seeing maybe the reasons and the excuses that we've drummed up to not want to believe in you. Maybe there's a form of godliness that Jesus, you step into and you just sort of turn it on its head, and you make our previous religious practices and all these things just like filthy rags when we get to see how great it is that we've been saved by grace. That you give us something that we don't deserve. You step into our mess and you came, and it's not some hill that we can ascend by being a good person. Lord, you come in and you stir these things up, and in the same way that you put us even against our own family, Lord, I pray that when you do that, give us a heart of compassion for the lost, but also give us a heart to see that you are to be treasured above all of those other things. Lord, I thank you also for the instruction that unless we're willing to give up all of those other things, we can't be your disciple. And so in so doing, I pray that as we find our satisfaction in you, that our hearts would well up with joy, and that we would bow down and worship just as you have shown us in this story. Thank you for being a good shepherd, to seeing those those of us who maybe feel alone, maybe who feel on the out with our families, in our communities, I do thank you that you are faithfully and consistently good, that you walk with us in the midst of those things. And I pray, Father, that you would begin to give us courage like this blind man has. Lord, we're going to see in the next conversation the courage that this man begins to have to be able to speak out, to speak for who you really are. And we just ask that you bless our hearts by these words in Jesus' name. Amen. That's it for today. But if you would like to stick around, we're going to give a few minutes. Unless you want to stick around, we've got a little video we're going to show first, and then we're going to spend some time praying for the persecuted church. It is the week of prayer for the persecuted church, and so we're going to do that. So if you got the video, and then after the video, if you need to go home or if you want to take off, feel free to do that. Otherwise, I'm going to pass out some sheets here, and we're going to spend a few minutes praying for the persecuted church. If you wouldn't mind.
My name is Rebecca. I live in the north of Nigeria. One evening I was out with my daughter, and on our way home we saw smoke rising above our village. We were under attack. There was nothing we could do to defend ourselves. My husband and I were married in that village. My wedding day, it was the happiest day of my life. Some members of our church gave us a wedding gift. It was a Bible. We read it together every day. And when our children were old enough, we read it to them and their friends.
Let the little children come to me.
Let the little children come to me.
And do not forbid them.
And do not forbid them.
For such is the kingdom of heaven.
Such is the kingdom of heaven.
Matthew chapter 19.
Matthew chapter 19.
Verse 14.
Verse 14.
On the day our village burnt to the ground, my husband and my son were killed in the attack. I was devastated. I mourned for many months. Some of us were able to return to our village to reclaim anything that was left. Parts of Genesis and Revelation were burnt, but the rest was mostly intact. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. All flesh is like grass, and all its glory like a wild flower. The grass withers and the flower falls off, but the word of the Lord endures forever. I still use this Bible. It reminds me of God's faithfulness. Naked I came from my mother's womb, but naked I shall return there. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. The Lord is a husband to all widows. I look to him for every need. This is what I am still holding on to.